Welcome to the 12th module for the Global DARE Foundation Patient Collaborator Training Series. My name is Mousumi Bose, and I will be your narrator throughout these training modules to help you become an active patient collaborator in ongoing and upcoming research for adult Refson disease. In this module, we'll explore how scientific research gets funded and why funding is essential for advancing rare disease research. We'll discuss different types of research funding and grants, the organizers that provide this research funding, and how the funding process for the National Institutes of Health, or the NIH, which is incidentally one of the largest federal funders of research grants in the United States, works. We'll also highlight the important role that patient collaborators play in supporting research funding through advocacy, participation in research studies, and in community fundraising themselves. Finally, we'll look at a real-world community fundraising case study and conclude with key takeaways to help move research and research funding forward. So just kicking this conversation off, scientific research requires funding to support every stage of the scientific process and the activities involved in research. Research funding pays for the people involved, including researchers, clinicians, study teams, as well as the equipment, lab supplies, the clinical trials themselves, as well as anything else that is needed to collect and analyze data. For rare diseases, funding is especially critical because patient populations are small and there is often less commercial investment in this area of research. And without adequate funding, it becomes more difficult to develop new treatments and improve patient care within rare diseases. And you may see that sometimes research moves at this very, very slow pace. Part of that reason may be due to a lack or limited funding. So research can be supported through several types of funding, including gifts, partnerships, and community fundraising, and more recently, crowdfunding, which is another type of community fundraising. I'm not going to be talking too much about crowdfunding, but I will talk about other types of community fundraising. These funds, this funding, whether it's a gift or a grant or a collaborative agreement, can come from individual donors, government agencies, nonprofit organizations, or industry partners. It should be noted that the research funding landscape has changed dramatically over the last several decades, and even in just the past few years. Traditional government funding has become increasingly competitive, while partnerships with different organizations, philanthropy, industry collaborations, and community-driven fundraising have become increasingly more important, especially for rare disease research, where, as I said before, the resources are often limited. And even a relatively small grant can generate the preliminary data and publications that researchers need to compete for much larger federal grants later on. So I spend a lot of time talking about research funding with using the context of grants. And I talk about grants mainly because grants are a very valuable source of research funding because unlike things like loans, they don't need to be paid back. The grant process also helps researchers clearly define the needs of a project, and as well as set specific goals and develop well-planned programs that can support long-term growth and sustainability. Unlike donor gifts, grants generally require a competitive application and review process, which then adds credibility to both the research and the organization that's receiving the funding. Grants can also pay for overhead or indirect costs, which gifts don't necessarily do. And oftentimes, grants may come with stipulations about intellectual property rights, which may not be stipulated in a gift. In general, grants are considered more academically prestigious than gifts or loans or other forms of research funding. Research funding and grants, they can come from many different sources. Government agencies such as the National Institutes of Health, as well as other federal organizations, which you see some of these organizations listed here, are major funders of scientific research. But research funding can also come from non-governmental organizations, including public charities, professional societies, health advocacy groups, private foundations, as well as industry partners. Because each funder has different priorities and goals, researchers often seek support from multiple sources to help advance important research forward. In addition, public charities and private foundations like the Global Dare Foundation can also support research projects. Foundations like Global Dare do not have as much funding as some of these big federal organizations, but they can still support important work in the rare disease research space by supporting early research, the development of registries and natural history studies, which you already see the Global Dare Foundation doing, as well as pilot projects that can lead to larger federal or industry grants. So, as I mentioned earlier, the National Institutes of Health, or the NIH, is the largest federal funder of research grants in the US and actually the whole world. So I thought I'd just give a brief overview of how grant applications are coordinated through the NIH. The NIH is made up of 27 institutes and centers. And most of these institutes or centers are focused on a specific disease area, organ system, or scientific field. For example, the National Cancer Institute focuses on cancer. The National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Strokes focuses on conditions affecting the brain and the nervous system, while the National Institutes of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases focuses on metabolism, nutrition, and kidney disease. The one exception among these institutes and centers is the Center for Scientific Review, or the CSR. And this doesn't have a disease focus. This is actually where grant applications are first cycled through upon submission. The CSR helps identify peer reviewers and appropriate institutes or centers within the NIH that may be a good fit for potentially funding any given grant application. Once a grant application has been reviewed and scored, it is ultimately up to the institute or center that it's been assigned to whether or not the application should be funded. It should be noted that each institute or center has its own budget and they differ across these centers. For example, the National Cancer Institute has a lot of funding. So it has each of these centers or institutes have their own budget, priorities, and pay lines. And this is in addition to its own unique number of applications that it receives. So as a result, funding decisions often vary by which institutes or centers that a grant application has been assigned to. In some cases, there may be multiple institutes that a grant application has been assigned to. So this infographic here provides an overview of the current NIH-wide strategic plan framework. At the top of the NIH mission, which is to advance knowledge about living systems and improve health. It also highlights the 27 institutes and centers that support this research. The framework is organized around three main objectives: advancing research areas, strengthening research capacity, and promoting responsible research conduct. Finally, this framework emphasizes cross-cutting themes such as health disparities, women's health, public health, collaborative science, and data science that are integrated across all NIH-funded research efforts. I want to also add that although this is technically the current framework, I need to disclose that there is a new NIH strategic framework that has been under development over the last several years, and institutes are already updating their priorities to align with that of the current administration, which means that funding priorities may shift before even this new framework is even formally released. So that's important to keep in mind. The NIH offers several types of funding opportunities, each designed to support different stages and goals of research. When looking into the different types of grants, it should be noted that it becomes a bit of an alphabet soup of designations. So, for example, the investigator-initiated grants, which is that top bullet point, are often referred to as the R series of grants. So you may hear of grants that are referred to as an R01, an R03, or an R21. These types of grants fund original research ideas proposed by scientists, while the training and the career development grants, which are oftentimes referred to as the K series, so K01, K08, K99. There's also the fellowship series of awards, which are the F series. Both the career development awards, the K awards, as well as the fellowship awards, they help support either students or early career researchers. There are also pilot awards that provide funding to test out new ideas. Cooperative agreements encourage collaboration between researchers and the NIH, and specialized awards target specific research priorities, while contracts fund projects where the NIH defines the work as opposed to it being investigator um, initiated. So in the case of NIH contracts, as I said before, these are projects that are funded where certain institutes of the NIH specifically define the scope of work that needs to be completed. So let's talk a little bit about the ins and outs of writing and submitting a grant proposal, as well as the review process. I'm going to stick with this NIH context, just again, because um, a lot of times in scientific research, um, the applicants are applying to the NIH, being the largest federal funder of research grants. So writing a successful NIH grant proposal is a very lengthy process, and it typically takes anywhere up to a year to write and submit a grant application. This timeline begins with careful planning, including refining the research idea, accessing available resources to help support the grant application and the proposed grant activities. It's also a really important step in consulting with the NIH program staff to ensure that the funding mechanism that a researcher is planning to apply for is a good fit for the project that the researcher is going to propose. Following that, the researchers then spend several months writing and revising the application, gathering feedback, that's a really important part, and completing the institutional requirements before submitting the proposal. And there's a lot of details in addition to just writing the grant proposal that need to be addressed before you submit it to the NIH. And like I said, this process can take up to a year. After an NIH grant application is submitted to the NIH, it goes through a lengthy multi-step review process before funding decisions are made and the grant is awarded. The application is first assigned to the appropriate peer review group, often called a study section, where experts evaluate its scientific quality, innovation, and potential impact of the application. This study section is generally put together by the Center for Scientific Review, which is one of those institutes that we were just talking about before. Once it goes through that peer review process in the study section, the applicants will then receive a score and a summary of the reviewer's feedback. Next, an advisory council of members from the institute or center that the application is assigned to is charted to consider the application before making the final funding decision. If it is approved and the award is issued, then the research can begin. From submission to funding, okay, this review process typically takes about 10 to 12 months. It should also be noted that oftentimes once a review happens and a score is received, if it's not funded immediately, that applicant may need to go and revise and resubmit the grant for the next grant cycle. So, if we're talking about best case scenario, this process from submission to funding takes about another year. But it could be significantly longer if it's required for the applicant to revise and resubmit. So while we're talking about grants being rejected and then applicants having to potentially revise and resubmit, let's talk a little bit about the chances of obtaining funding from the NIH. Although the NIH provides significant funding opportunities, securing a grant, as I've sort of alluded to before, is highly competitive. And what this graph shows is that while the number of grant applications have remained high over the years, only a small percentage are actually funded. The funding rate went down considerably during the early 2000s and stayed that way for a while, and it's dropped even further since the beginning of this new government administration. In 2025, approximately 13% of R01, remember R01s are those investigator-initiated grants, 13% of these R01s as well as R01 equivalent NIH grant applications have received funding. 13%. While these stats certainly highlight the importance of submitting a strong, well-prepared proposal, this fact also serves as a reminder as to why we need additional funding sources and why patient advocacy groups like the Global DARE are so important, especially for rare disease research. Overall, NIH funding, as well as other federal funders, they do provide a tremendous opportunity with large-scale funding to support scientific research. However, obtaining that funding is, as I mentioned, highly competitive, and it's quite exhaustive, taking into consideration that timeline. The application and review process can take up to 2 years or even longer. And the funding depends on the priorities and the budget of NIH institutes, and only a small percentage of applications are ultimately selected. So bottom line here is researchers and investigators, scientific scientific researchers, clinicians, they may submit the most incredible of grant applications, but it's still not guaranteed funding despite the promise and the innovation of an application, because there's so many other things to consider. Nevertheless, successful NIH funding can make a significant impact in advancing research, which is why it's still important for rare disease researchers to apply for governmental funding through NIH and other organizations. Switching gears a little, I want to highlight that patient collaborators can play an important role in helping to secure funding for rare disease research. One way is through advocacy, such as contacting legislators and other lawmakers by sharing personal experiences to raise awareness about the need for increasing research funding at the government level. Additionally, participating in research such as natural history studies or patient registries also provides valuable foundational data that can help researchers use to strengthen future grant applications. Finally, patient collaborators can support research through direct fundraising, whether it's through organizing community events or using online crowdfunding, which is becoming increasingly more popular. These efforts can help increase both awareness as well as the financial support that is required to advance rare disease research. So I'm going to spend the rest of this module talking a little bit about the process that goes into organizing any kind of community fundraiser. So community fundraisers are especially important in rare disease research because these types of fundraisers are a great way, as I said before, to raise awareness and funding simultaneously. Additionally, being as a part of the rare disease community, many rare disease families find that their local friends, neighbors, and other local organizations, they want to help rare disease families, but they're not really sure how. Community events provide a meaningful way, as I said before, to raise both awareness and research funding while bringing people together in support of a shared cause. And it should be stated that even the smallest of fundraisers can help make a valuable difference. So now I'm going to talk to you about a community fundraiser that my family and friends helped organize and execute for several years. You may remember from the first module that I'm actually a rare disease parent. I'm the mother to Ilan, who was born with a very severe form of a peroxisomal disorder called Zellweger spectrum disorder. And I will disclose that I have absolutely no background in fundraising, but I did want to do something to honor the memory of my son in a meaningful way. And I had a lot of friends and family that really wanted to help support us but didn't know how. So we came up with this little community event called the Ilan-a-thon. So the Ilan-a-thon was a 5K walk run event that was aimed to help raise funds for the research grant program for an organization called the Global Foundation for Peroxisomal Disorders, which is another patient advocacy group for peroxisomal disorders. This was held as 3 annual, as I said, 5K walk and run events. We had a lot of other stuff that we were able to acquire. We had a lot of children's activities. We held these 5K walk runs in the Baltimore, Maryland area. And this fundraiser brought together in total, we had 3 events in around from about 2013 through 2016, and collectively this event brought together around 1,000 participants and raised approximately $80,000 for the Global Foundation for Peroxisomal Disorders research grant program. So together, our family and friends and our whole community, we were able to generate meaningful financial support while also raising awareness and bringing families, researchers, and other supporters together around this shared cause. So I'm not going to lie, the Ilan-a-thon itself, especially over 3 years, it was a pretty big undertaking, no doubt. But one important takeaway in this module that I really want to drive home is that there is no community fundraiser that is too small to make an impact on research, even especially for rare disease research. Whether it's something like a spaghetti dinner, a happy hour, a workout class, a bowling event, or any kind of activity that the community can rally around. Every event can help raise awareness, can raise funding, and ultimately support rare disease research. The best fundraiser is the one that fits your community best, that manages to bring people together and encourage participation. And as I said, even these small events can make a meaningful difference, especially when many people are gathered to contribute and participate in these events. So this module is not meant to be this specific step-by-step explicit how-to on community fundraisers. But I did want to add a few tips I learned along the way in case you are a patient collaborator watching this module and considering organizing some sort of community event fundraiser. So once you've decided to put together and hold a community fundraiser, really the next step is to turn that idea into a successful event. This involves choosing the right type of event for your community, building a team of people that help you execute the event. I did not do this alone. I really relied on my community, my family, my friends to help put together our event, the Ilan-a-thon. Um, so building that team, creating an appropriate budget for expenses to execute the event, coordinating with whoever is going to, if you're raising money for a specific organization, making sure that you coordinate with that organization and leverage their nonprofit status so that any donations can be tax deductible, as well as managing logistics. Speaking of donations, for any kind of event that you're trying to raise funds for, you're going to need to also secure sponsors. Um, so um, in that sponsorship, that fundraise, that's where the majority of the fundraising occurs. You're also going to need to be able to promote the event to your community, to raise awareness about the event, and rely on your team as well as additional volunteers, depending on how large the event is, to help out on the event day. It's also a good idea once you have secured sponsorship or any other donors that donate either services or funds to the event. It's a good idea to sort of follow up and thank those supporters so that you can build up momentum for any future fundraising efforts. So as we approach our closing, um, I want to highlight some of the big takeaways of this module. So first, research funding is absolutely essential for turning scientific discoveries into better treatments and improved patient care. And grants can oftentimes from different organizations can provide substantial support. It should be noted that for a lot of these federal funders, which can allow for large scale funding, the application review process can be quite lengthy and highly competitive, which makes every single funding opportunity valuable. And as we've discussed throughout this module, patient collaborators can play an important role in advocating for research, advocating for increased research funding, participating in research such as patient registries and natural history studies to help build foundational data to apply for bigger grants. Um, and in helping to raise awareness through community fundraising efforts. These community fundraising efforts, no matter how large or small, can make a meaningful difference in rare disease research. Every contribution helps move research forward, and brings us one step closer to new discoveries and better outcomes for patients. So when you're thinking about community fundraising, really all you need is your desire, your village, and your time. Looking ahead, our training module series will conclude with our last module that will be focusing on biomarkers and outcome measures in adult Refsum disease. So I want to thank you for your time in watching this module. I encourage you to complete the survey that's linked to this, and I am looking forward to our last module in this training series. See you during that last session. If you'd like to learn more or have any questions, you can reach out directly to the Global DARE Foundation at info@globaldare.org. If you are looking for guidance about organizing a 5K event or another community event, please feel free to contact me, Mousumi Bose, at BOSEM@montclair.edu.